Memoirs are possibly the most puzzling genre to me, and let me see if I can explain why. See, most of us would consider ourselves to be the experts on our life, and with good reason. I personally have been me for as long as I have been alive. At every major plot point or turning point in my life, I was there. I had a front row seat to every single memory, every single formative event, every single core emotion, and yet memoirs as a whole are kind of garbage. I'm not trashing on any particular one. I just mean as a whole, I tend to prefer biographies over autobiographies with very few exceptions. And even my favorite autobiographies are usually written with a great author. But I think underneath the failure of many memoirs is a powerful lesson. A lesson about our lives, our stories, and the original meaning of the word philosophy. It's a lesson that I want to explore through the lens of a memoir that I unexpectedly loved, Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey. Now, I picked up this book because of a recommendation written on the back by Ryan Holiday. I have the dust cover off of this book because I hate dust covers. I know they look great, I just don't like the way they feel. Anyway, Ryan Holiday said that it should not surprise you that this book is good, but it should surprise you just how good it is. And after reading it, I couldn't agree more. In fact, I think that was apparent within the very first chapter. This is a book about Matthew McConaughey's life. It's a book that focuses on his family, his early childhood, and his teenage years, moving to Australia, bumming around the United States, getting into acting. But underneath all of those stories, I think that this book is concerned with philosophy. Now, philosophy is a word that can evoke a lot of reactions and a lot of different emotions. I tend to think about an academic setting or books that are way thicker than this one and are impossible to read. But the original people who took on the word philosopher, who thought about philosophy, didn't think of it as an academic or theoretical question. They thought of it as the very practical answer to the question, how to live. I think that when we start to look at this book through the lens of that question, we can start to understand why it works where so many other memoirs fail. So this isn't Matthew McConaughey trying to convince you that he's some kind of genius, because I don't think he thinks he is. It's not Matthew McConaughey trying to be famous or even just trying to tell his story. I think this is the honest reflections of a man who wants to look at his past and the values that he holds and try to understand why. Try to understand his own answer to the question, how to live, through the lens of his core memories and experiences and thoughts.
To that I say, all right, all right, all right.
I want to talk about a 1992 essay by David Foster Wallace called How Tracy Austin Broke My Heart. It's a review of a memoir about a child prodigy tennis player who, by all accounts, had a fascinating story. And you would look at her life from the outside and say, well, there are all sorts of moments that probably teach powerful lessons. There are all sorts of behind-the-scenes things that would be fascinating and interesting, and yet the memoir really falls flat. Now, why is it that somebody can live a life so interesting, so novel, experience an insane level of success and then an insane level of failure, like the memoir David Foster Wallace is talking about, and yet write such a boring story full of cliches that don't land and truisms and one-liners that just fall completely flat? Well, I think that it gets into the problem of memoirs, one that actually has something to teach us, and that is the problem of perspective. Now, I think it's easy to see that in the memoirs of, say, super athletes. When you look at athletes, you see people who have spent their entire life from a very young age with one singular focused goal. They've gotten up early, they've trained, they've eaten. Everything they do is focused on being amazing at one thing. And then oftentimes they are amazing at that one thing. And they sit down to write about it, but they don't know what it's like to live, say, a normal life. See, most people don't have a life that is focused around one singular goal. They don't have just one thing. Their entire life is disciplined and structured and built around. So when those people sit down to write their memoirs, they don't actually have any perspective on what makes their own life unique. But see, it's not just athletes who have that problem. You know, earlier I said that you're the expert on your life because you were there for every great moment, but you were only there. You don't have any external perspective on your own life. You're kind of forced to live out your own memories and core thoughts and feelings, whether you want to remember them or not. So that's the problem, I think, with memoirs. It's why it's easier to tell a story about somebody else than it is often to tell a story about yourself, because you've been forced to live your story. You don't actually necessarily know what makes it unique. And yet, for everything I just said about memoirs, I'm talking about one today. Because I think what makes this book so special isn't the crazy stories, it's not even the great prose or writing, it's perspective. Matthew McConaughey has found a way to have real perspective on his life. Now, see, some of that is probably his temperament as a thinker. He's a storyteller. He's been telling his stories his whole entire life. But I actually think that there is a secret behind his success in this memoir. One that leads into a shameless plug for our company and what we do, sort of.
Ever since I learned to write, I've been keeping a journal, writing down anything that turned me on, turned me off, made me laugh, made me cry, made me question, or kept me up at night.
Now, Matthew McConaughey, to my knowledge, has not used a hero's journal.
It'd be a lot cooler if you did.
But he is no stranger to a journal. In fact, going into writing this book, Greenlights, he had been journaling for 36 years. In fact, this entire book is informed by a journal. It's informed by reading through the writings he had from high school to his first movies to pivotal moments and changes throughout his life, having to face up to issues in his family, issues in the world, and issues in himself. And in each one of those moments, he has a luxury, the luxury of perspective. He gets the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with himself from the past in the form of writing. And this informs the book to its core. In fact, throughout the book, there are actually excerpts and images of the exact journals that he used to write this book. See, for everything good I said about perspective, I think it's almost impossible to have perspective on ourselves. In fact, I think it is impossible in the moment because in life, the camera never stops rolling. We never get to say scene or call for line or reread the script. We're forced to be in the moment, to live and react. And it's only after the fact that I think we can have perspective. See, that's why I think reflection is so difficult to find. And it requires not just the time or energy or effort to go back and think through the past, but courage and honesty to go back and ask not just how do I want to remember this happening, but how did it really happen? What were the good and bad things that I did, that I was responsible for, that informed my answer to the question, how to live? See, the trouble of having perspective isn't just taking the time or energy to do it or having the courage to be honest about it. It's the fact that you today are a fundamentally different person than you were 20 years ago, or even 10 or 5 or 1. And nobody ever comes along and tells us the ways that we've changed. See, I think the beauty of Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey is not just that he journaled for 36 years, not just the function itself of journaling, but the fact that for each one of those journal pages, the time he took out of his already busy day, the distractions from high school to Hollywood and a family and beyond, to write down his thoughts. But now he can go back and re-encounter himself anew. I think it's what makes this book so profound and fresh and interesting. What makes it a memoir worth reading is that it is a real confrontation with the past self and the new life that arises from that interaction. See, it would be possible to write a memoir without those journal entries, but I think that if Matthew McConaughey hadn't kept those journals, I probably wouldn't be talking about it today. I think it's what informs this book and makes it so special, so unique, so thoughtful. See, there's this quote generally attributed to Benjamin Franklin that goes something to the effect of people either do things worth writing about or write things worth reading. I think that Greenlights is one of those rare moments when somebody did both. It's not just the story of an interesting or vibrant or unusual life. It's a reflection on those events, taking them and remembering them for what they are, the events that informed the question of philosophy, an answer to the question of what does it mean to live life well.
It's called Greenlights because it's a story about how I have, and we all can, catch more of them in this life we're living. You see, we don't like the red and yellow lights because they take up our time, right? But when we realize that they all eventually turn green, that's when they reveal their rhyme. That's when life's a poem, and we start getting what we want and what we need at the same time. So if you're looking for some more green lights like I am, hop on the highway and let's go catch as many of them as we can.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching that. My name is Zach from The Hero's Journal. I was honestly floored at how good this book was. I read the physical book, but I also love the audiobook because Matthew McConaughey reads it. It's a whole other experience. You have to check it out. Let me know what you think in the comments if you've read this book, what your favorite part was, and what you learned. Now this feels like an appropriate time to shamelessly plug The Hero's Journal. See, we designed this journal to help you discover the story that you're telling about yourself and to understand how story theory and the best of goal-setting science can help you fulfill your goal. So if you want to learn more about that or order yours, you can visit heroesjournal.co. Finally, we make videos every week talking about story theory, our favorite fandoms, and how they play out in our lives. So if this video is interesting to you or helpful, hit like, subscribe, and we'll